Most people in West Virginia live in small towns and rural communities, and when we need a lawyer, we're most likely going to deal with small town lawyers. We'll talk about life as a lawyer in a small town right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Closed captioning for The Law Works is made possible by a grant from the Monongalia County Bar Association to support legal information and education for all West Virginians. The Law Works is made possible by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and legal system, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. By the generous support of Software Systems Incorporated, a West Virginia company established in 1975, providing high-end support services, programming, and consulting for county government AS400 mid-range computer systems, as well as PC-based systems. And by viewers like you.
Law practices are divided into two general groups, solo and small firm lawyers and big law. In small-town West Virginia, we mostly see solo and small firm lawyers. My guests are attorneys J. Burton Hunter III of Buchanan and Patrick A. Nichols of Parsons, both in West Virginia. Pat, Bert, thank you for joining us. Why practice in a small town? Pat, why are you there?
I've been practicing in a small town since '79. I was born and raised where I practice, and I began practicing with my father, and I was able to, I felt acclimated and I felt comfortable, and that's why I began practicing in a small town.
Bert, why are you in Buchanan?
Well, I'm very, very comfortable in Buchanan. I picked a small college to attend because I had a very small high school class of 43, and two of my classmates came to Wesleyan with me, and I met my best friend and lifetime partner, Nancy, at the freshman mixer. We had to find a job after 4 years of Air Force judge advocate work as an assistant judge advocate, and we drove through Buchanan from visiting a friend, Bill Garrett, in Webster Springs, and my wife said that she thought this would be a nice place to raise a family. We already had 2 children, and we had 2 more in Buchanan, and it has been good to us.
It's interesting because in West Virginia, when we think of small towns, we typically think of a town like Parsons or Kingwood or, well, there are hundreds of other small towns. And when we get to a town the size of Buchanan, it is a little bigger than the classic small town, but still small town. But there's hardly a town in West Virginia that's not a small town if you look at it from the national point of view. Right. We are a rural community, even when we talk about cities like Charleston and Wheeling. To many people, those are small towns. Pat, you said you practice with your father. What is your practice like?
Basically, the practice in a small town, you do a little bit of everything from court appointments to writing deeds to writing wills, advising mom or dad about being in a nursing home, just different problems that are hard to imagine that people will call you on the phone or stop you on the street and they'll tell you their problems.
You're kind of like in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, although that didn't deal with law. What we saw the savings and loan company doing is
much the same thing as a banker. You know, I've got problems. I can't make my payment this month. What should I do? Oh, Pat, by the way, I'm glad I saw you. I have a question. And you deal with many different areas, you're not specialized from a point of view that you say, oh, I don't do those type of things. Or you can tell the people, I don't know the answer to your question, but maybe I can find it out for you.
Is that fairly typical of your practice over the years, Bert?
A little different, Dan. I have slowly evolved into doing one general category of thing, which is represent individuals in conflicted situations. So I can represent injured people. I certainly do an awful lot of family law, which is very difficult. I've had about a dozen fatalities in my practice of about 3,000 cases over 35 years. And civil disputes such as grandmother's will, boundary line dispute, right-of-way dispute, and contracts. So I don't do criminal law anymore. I did a 2-week murder trial that took 600 hours out of my life and decided that I didn't want to do that. So I would say that I've excluded from my practice about half of what might be available for me to do, but I've got people in my office, individuals every day that I like to help.
Now, you said something that's got a lot of people at home scratching their heads. You said you had fatalities in your family law practice, and I understand that to mean that someone either became violent towards someone else and committed a wrongful killing, or toward themselves and committed suicide.
Right, either a client or a recent former client or somebody who had called and said they were coming back, either were killed or someone took their own life. It's a terrible element that sometimes to get back at the other spouse, someone will take their own life and leave a most hateful note to them, blaming them.
Now, the fact that you mentioned that, and listening to what Pat said about his practice, causes me to think that you, as a small town lawyer, become very personally involved in your clients' cases. Is that a fair statement?
You do become involved in them because you see the people almost on a daily basis. At least in my office, they can come, they pretty well come when they want to. They'll just drop by a lot of times. A lot of times you can't see them, but they almost feel that they can call you at any time or come and see you at any time. And you become almost at their beck and wish to answer their questions a lot of times. You know, and you become acquainted.
We should say we don't encourage you to drop by your lawyer's office without an appointment, because that is disruptive to your practice. And a lawyer, whether it's a small town or a big city, a small firm or a large firm, has to be able to focus on what they're doing. But still, you have to be responsive to the people in the community, because they are more than just customers.
Their problems are important to them, and they feel those, you have to address them. And a lot of times they need to talk about them, speak about them, and it comforts them a good bit sometimes just to be able to get you on the phone and say, oh, I had a question about this or that. What about this portion of our case? I find that if you're able to talk to them and communicate with them, the case goes much better.
I had a magistrate judge. That's our lowest level of courts in West Virginia. They used to be called justices of the peace and JP courts. Now they're magistrate courts. I had a magistrate tell me one time, I walked into the courtroom. It was a landlord-tenant dispute. I was representing the landlord. And the magistrate looked at me and said, "Why are you here? I thought you only handled big cases." And I said, "Well, this is the biggest case my client has right now, and that's why I'm here, because I'm representing my client." And she looked a little confused, but said, "Okay." And we went on with the trial, so I guess I passed muster for that. But that's what you do. You have to recognize that what might be a small problem somewhere else or in another law office is a very big problem indeed.
For that individual, and it's important to them. You know, just like you're talking about an eviction case, you know, I'm going to lose my house. I have my children. Where am I going to go? I'm wrongfully evicted. I got to stay in the house.
How do you stay up on all the things that you need to know in a diverse practice? Bert, you said you're limiting your practice. Basically, you're a trial lawyer now, I guess, but still you have to maintain a broad spectrum of knowledge because of the really, truly diverse cases that come into your office. How do you do that?
Well, I'm a habitual attender of continuing education. Sometimes it seems I'm away from the office too much, but I've tried to make myself available so that the cases that are substantial, that come along maybe every other year, are cases I don't have to turn down. And so I was on the board of governors of the West Virginia Trial Lawyers Association. Now it's the West Virginia Association for Justice for 20 years. And then I get to know who the most esteemed trial lawyers in the state are. I have a larger staff than average, and therefore I have to have efficiencies. And so I have become sort of the nerdy, tech-savvy lawyer, and that's part of what I'm marketing myself. And I'm a show-off, and therefore I love writing my blog article and being on Facebook and sending letters to my colleagues with things that I've learned. And at this moment, at my age, you wouldn't think that putting 60 hours plus a week would be a good idea. I do love it. I would love to figure out a way to do a little less than that, but I just come to the office at 7 every morning, try to get a full day's work done by noon, and then whatever else I can accomplish for the rest of the day.
Pat, how do you stay up on the broad spectrum of law that you need to understand? You need to understand consumer law, family law, real estate law, banking law, and dozens of other things. How do you do it?
As Bert says, you have to go to a lot of continuing education, but you find yourselves a lot of times not knowing the answer to questions, and if you have a network of attorneys that you trust, you can call them and speak to them, say, hey, I've got this problem, or I have attorneys call me and say, hey, you do some of this a little bit better than maybe I do. What's your take on this? And I find that a network of attorneys is priceless.
And lest you think that that's unusual, it's been a few years ago now. I had a friend who was appointed as a judge, a federal judge actually, and she'd been on the bench for several years, and I went to talk to her on one occasion. I said, are you over the feeling silly part when you call somebody else and ask them for what their ideas or what they think? And she said, no, you still feel silly, but you still do it because you want to make sure that you're doing it right, and at least as importantly, you want to make sure that you're doing it consistently with what everyone else is doing.
And if you call someone and say, hey, I have this problem, what do you think of this? And they'll say, oh, I had something like that, and here's what I did. What do you think of that? And it'll get you at least thinking down the right track, and then you can do some research and see what you think you may be right.
And Dan, last week I sent out a little email and got the name of a really good private investigator from a colleague, and this morning one called to ask how I would subpoena the other party in order to get some records, and we collaborated that we would serve the other attorney and come view the records at their office. I don't know how not to do that when you're a sole practitioner. You've got to have some friends, and I know who studies up on this area and who's expert in this area, and we use each other and pick each other's brain.
We're talking about life as a rural and small town lawyer. My guests are attorneys J. Burton Hunter III of Buchanan and Pat A. Nichols of Parsons, both in West Virginia. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. The reason I say both in West Virginia is because this program goes onto YouTube and onto iTunes, and
all over.
People may watch it from anywhere. West Virginia is not particularly unusual in that. Well, you know, young lawyers come out of law school, they have a license to practice law. Can't they just go practice law?
It's going to be very, very difficult if they just want to go set a shop up, put a shingle out and say, open the door, because you're going to get a mirage of issues that come in. Everything, as I mentioned before, mom is in a nursing home. How do I protect these assets? Junior broke into the house, stole all the stuff. Is he going to go to jail? You just need to know a whole host of things. I bought a bad car. Does the lemon law apply? You only learn these things, I believe, by doing them for quite a period of time. And you need someone that at least you can bounce an idea off of. And I think you need a young attorney coming out of law school almost needs a mentor to bounce some ideas off of, and at least feel comfortable then when they give some advice to people that come in and ask questions.
Now, you practiced with your father the first few years, several years.
For about 25 years, yes, sir.
So he was your mentor, I would assume.
Exactly.
Bert, did you work with other attorneys?
I worked with Dave and Lynn Rexroad when they put their practice together in Buchanan. That's how I got my first job. And but David had a very laid-back way, very informal way of doing things. Mr. Holy, who practiced until he was 93, called and asked if I could cover his practice while he had heart surgery. So I came into an intact law office, and he came back a year later, and his law office was still there, and that's how I got started. I have noticed that we do have young lawyers hanging out the shingle and making a living. My perception, and you'd have to bring one or two of those in here to talk to perhaps, is that they've gotten mired into the court-appointed system where they live and die on the $45 an hour. And I think it's very hard for them to make that transition to another stage if they do not have the funding to get the office equipment and at least the one really good full-time crack secretary. I think it's going to be difficult for them.
You talked about the court-appointed system, and one of you mentioned taking court appointments for the first few years of your practice. We're talking about a system, it's basically a nationwide system. The system in West Virginia is that if someone is indigent, that is, does not have but enough money maybe to support themselves and their families marginally, and they get in criminal trouble, criminal law trouble. Maybe they committed a crime, maybe they didn't, but they're accused of doing something. They just don't have the resources to employ a lawyer. So the government says it is so important that their rights be protected in the criminal law system, they will be provided with a lawyer at no cost to them, or at worst, very nominal cost to them. And we have a system where lawyers are appointed and they are paid by the state of West Virginia. And currently in West Virginia, those lawyers are paid at a rate of $45 per hour for out-of-court work and $65 per hour for in-court work. And there are a lot of people out there saying, wow, that's a lot of money. I'd like to get into that deal because I'm only making $17 an hour, or I'm only making $7.25 or something like that, whatever minimum wage is right now. So it sounds like a lot of money, but to open a law office and to maintain it and to support yourself, it really isn't, is it?
It isn't at all. It's only a fraction of my hourly overhead. In other words, my overhead would be two to three times that hourly rate. After 20 years of doing my loyal duty, I asked the court if I could be relieved of that, and that was 15 or 20 years ago.
Yet many young lawyers do it. You still do court-appointed work, Pat?
Just very seldom. When the judge says you shall do it, then you do it. I sort of stopped doing them a couple years ago, but for a long time I took the majority of probably what Tucker County had because there was no one else to do them. And the system relies upon you to do them, otherwise it grinds to a halt.
Well, lawyers have a duty to perform public service work, and part of that is to work for reduced wage or reduced hourly rate. Some of that is to work for free. We're talking about life as a rural and small town lawyer. My guests are attorneys J. Burton Hunter III of Buchanan, West Virginia, and Pat A. Nichols of Parsons, West Virginia. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. You do pro bono work? That is, do you work for free sometimes?
A lot of times you end up, people will stop you, they'll come to your house, they'll call you on the phone, they'll have this question or that question. Can you help me? Can you do this for me? And a lot of times I don't bill for it. You don't feel like you should bill for it. You want to feel that you've helped someone. It's a difficult line sometimes. When do you start billing for someone that doesn't have any funds? And you know they don't have any funds because you know them in the community.
The best way to find an attorney to help you at a reduced fee or perhaps for no fee is not to call the lawyer or to stop her or him on the street and say, can you help me for free, something like that. The best way to do it in West Virginia is to call your local legal aid office. They're in the phone book, it's not hard to find, and tell them of your problem, and if they can't help you, they will refer you to a program, the Pro Bono Referral Project, which can identify a lawyer for you to go talk to. Now, the lawyer may represent you for free or not.
In Tucker, we don't have legal aid.
Well, you have a regional legal aid office.
No, but it's an hour or hour and a half away. People don't.
I would bet, Pat, you spend a lot of time doing what we call public service or public interest law.
Good bit.
What kind of groups are you involved with? What kind of things do you do?
Anywhere from For an example, would be local organizations at PTAs or things of that nature. I'm sort of
There's so many of them.
There's so many of them. I can't. The local library. A lot of times, there's a few small towns in Tucker County that can't afford to pay, and they'll have questions about a flood ordinance, or they'll have this or that. You help the town out.
What kind of public service work do you do, Bert?
Well, my practice has been two major phases. When I was getting to be known, I did a great number of things. I was the president or vice president of the Upshur County Senior Center for 20 years. I was on the board.
Now you're a member.
Well, yeah. The Family Resource Network. I was on the Family Resource Network board. I chaired a drug and alcohol abuse investigative committee for the Board of Education. At a certain point, my secretary of 17 years left on 4 days' notice, and I had to reassess things. I was also perennial pro bono lawyer of the year in Upshur or Lewis, and also the largest provider of legal aid at $20 an hour. And at a certain stage, I realized that for my practice, there were people who needed me to carry their case on after they ran out of money, and that I was doing $30,000 or $40,000 worth of that work. I also had a lady call and bawl me out and leave a message that she wanted to be able to hang around with her boyfriend and have the children present, and the judge had said she couldn't do that. We looked, and I realized I had done $20,000 worth of work for her at my normal rate, and the limit that legal aid could pay me was $1,000. So about 10 years ago, I started focusing on the clients that truly needed it and began letting the other attorneys do more pro bono and legal aid work. I still do more work than ever for free, but it's my clients who run out of funds. But please don't let this get out.
I think you just did. Well, and in my practice, I did lots of pro bono, lots of civic work. Lawyers tend to be on the board of just about every charitable activity.
You can imagine, that's about right. Everything from a local nursing home to foundations that people have left a little bit of money and they want to donate at the end of the year.
And you start out, you'll be on the Heart Association board in your county or in your region, or the Mental Health Association board, and pretty soon
I was on
you're
United Way chair and member of that for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and then pretty soon you find yourself being on the state board of these things, and then you'll be on the regional or the national board, or you'll be working with them. And at some point you have to take a step back and say, no, wait a minute, what should I be doing with my time? Because everyone has different skills, and you develop skill set, and at some point in your practice you have to start to focus what you do. Which is one reason I got involved in public broadcasting, was because that's where my talents lay.
Remember one thing, not everybody's Dan Ringer. You do some remarkable things.
Or Bert Hunter or Pat Nichols. But everybody contributes, and everyone tries. But still, in your community, you still have individuals who come to you and want help, who need help, and who deserve help.
That's correct. And that's where you're sort of, by being in a small community, you know these people, you know their parents, you may know their children, and they know you, and they come to you and say, I really need some help. What can you do for me? And you try to answer their questions, or you do what little bit you can to a point.
And Dan, on the cases that I don't handle on a regular basis, as soon as I become aware that that person is not going to be somebody that I can help, I try to spend 10 minutes from that point to the end transitioning them to somebody that can help them. Al Carlin up here does employment law, and somebody else is a bankruptcy attorney, and the Attorney General has a good consumer protection office. And I think I've done this enough that even though I don't do those things, I can guide them someplace where they can get help.
One of the most important things in the practice of law, and in actually the undertaking of any activity, first of all, it's important to know what you know. If somebody asks you a question, You answer it, and if you're assured of the answer, but in law, only a fool quotes the law off the top of his or her head. You go back and you look at it. But the other thing that you have to know is you have to know what you don't know. You have to be able to say, I don't know, and then, Bert, as you suggest, but I can refer you to someone who may be able to help you with that, or to whom you can speak. Sometimes you're just slack-jawed because you don't know anything about it, but you still try to help somebody go somewhere. Pat Nichols, Bert Hunter, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thank you,
Dan.
Mr. Ringer.
Thank you also for being with us on behalf of the LawWorks. I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. On the LawWorks website at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks programs, additional information about this show's topic, and video of this and recent shows. You can also find the LawWorks programs on YouTube and iTunes. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The LawWorks show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a DVD of this show for classroom use, send us email at thelawworks@comcast.net or visit us on Facebook.
The LawWorks is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia Bar Foundation, the Mountain State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The LawWorks is made possible by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and legal system, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. By the generous support of Software Systems Incorporated, a West Virginia company established in 1975, providing high-end support services, programming, and consulting for county government AS400 mid-range computer systems, as well as PC-based systems. And by viewers like you.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.